Hi, and welcome back to another harmony lesson. Today we're going to be talking about secondary dominant, which means for the first time we're going to start getting a little bit chromatic, leave the diatonic system of strictly sticking to our key signatures and, the whatever scale that key signature tells us that we're in. Freedom, rise up against the man. Yeah! So, what is a secondary dominant? A secondary dominant is any chord that functions the way a dominant chord would, except for the fact that it's not a dominant. Now, there's only, generally, the root of the chord will be found within the scale that we're in. So if we're in C, you'll probably have your secondary dominant built on D or A, but there's two chords that you don't usually see your dominant built on. The first one is G, because it's already the dominant. It can't be the secondary dominant, it's the primary dominant. And the second one is F, the fourth of the scale. Now, we'll talk about why once we've gone over what dominants actually, or secondary dominants actually are, but just keep that in the back of your head. So, the dominants will have to resolve like a dominant. So let's say you're doing a 5 of 5 chord. Now, what does that mean? Well, a 5 is a dominant. So a 5 of, a dominant of 5, which in this case would be G. Which that tells you that we're on a D chord because D is the 5th scale degree if you were on in a G scale. In a similar kind of wording, a 5 of 6. So okay, a 5, a dominant of 6, or in this case A, because 5 scale degrees up from A is E. So we have a 5 of 5 chord, and so that's D, F sharp, and A. Now, the only thing that's really required here is that the F sharp move a half step up to G. Now, what this also means is that you can also have a deceptive cadence, or what is essentially a deceptive cadence. So instead of resolving D to G, you can go D to E. So long as that F sharp still goes to G, you can just go D, F sharp A, E, G, B. Now, having a straight kind of movement up like that can be kind of boring depending on what kind of musical style you're doing. It doesn't have a lot of counter movement. It's all parallel movement. So you might not want to do it quite so, but it can work depending on what you're doing and depending on what you think sounds good. Now, a common thing with secondary dominants is to add the 7th on top of it. So you can have 5, 7 of 5, which would be D, F sharp, A, C, going presumably to G, but the only really important thing is that our F sharp and our C resolve inwards. So you can once again go from a D7 chord to an E minor chord. You can still have that pseudo-deceptive cadence there. Now, why is it that we don't generally see a dominant built on the 4th scale degree? Why don't we see F, A, C, E flat? Well, that's because, and think about it logically, if you want to resolve your 3rd up a half step, that would mean your 3rd on an F chord, your A, is going to have to resolve to B flat, which isn't in the scale that we're working with. And secondary dominants are usually, you have the tension, and then you have the relief, and the relief is being back in the scale, and having a secondary dominant built on an F doesn't do that. Now, you could use one of those pseudo-deceptive cadences and go from F to G, but the problem with that is your G chord is going to be major still. So even though your root movement is right, your 3rd movement is going a whole step instead of a half step, and that kind of defeats the purpose of having that tritone there, at least if you're writing in a kind of classical tonal style. Now, the only thing I'll add is how do these fit into those chord progression charts that we looked at? How does it fit into a major chord progression or a minor chord progression? Well, the answer is it doesn't. You can use a dominant wherever you want, whenever you want, on any root note. So if you're going along and you're playing, you start on C, obviously, then you go to E, then to A. Well, then if you wanted to, what you could just do is just throw in a B dominant chord, a 5 of 3, and go, yep, I'm interrupting this kind of expected chord progression with this surprising chromatic gift for you, my audience. And for some reason, classical people just started accepting it and stopped getting quite so stuffy and uptight. And were like, that's just so insane that there was no way to make that elegant or graceful. Now, there is one way to kind of do that, and that is to kind of follow the normal chord patterns, but to just use a dominant. So let's say we're on C, and then you go to a 5 of 6, and then a 5 of 2, and then a 5 of 5, and then obviously you're on 5 and you go back to the 1, then what you've done is gone C, E, A, D, G, C, which is totally within the kind of chord progression that we have in that chart. But the thing is, it doesn't, in my opinion at least, it doesn't sound quite as fun. It makes the harmonies a little bit more complex, but it kind of loses the point of having it as like a secondary dominant, and it just kind of goes to me more into a kind of almost straightforward, kind of boring jazz type idea. But you can do it, and plenty of Broadway tunes do it to great success. There are ways to make it work. It's just, to me, sounds a little cliched, but not in all cases. And so, yeah, that's really what I have for you on talking about secondary dominance. Hope you can start having fun, taking your chord progressions and going, time to do something a little weird now. And, yeah, that's really it. Hope you're having a great week, and catch you here again soon.